Good evening all and welcome back to Paranoia Files. Tonight I bring you 8 accounts that emerged from the wilderness, where civilization ends and something far darker begins. In this episode, we venture into the isolated depths of nature with disturbing tales of camping trips that became waking nightmares. Drawn from genuine testimonies submitted by those who survived to share their stories. These are not mere fireside tales meant to entertain. These are raw confessions from individuals who entered the forest seeking peace and solitude, only to encounter predators, both human and otherwise, unexplained phenomena that defy rational explanation, and mysteries that remain unsolved to this very day. Each narrative has been meticulously reconstructed from first-hand accounts, witness statements, and documented incidents that law enforcement could never fully explain. To preserve the anonymity and safety of those involved, certain names and identifying details have been modified, but the core truth of what transpired remains untouched and unaltered. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Paranoia Files for daily explorations into authentic horror that will follow you long after the video ends. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when darkness descends and the next collection of true terror arrives. Now extinguish your lights, settle into the shadows, and prepare yourself for what lurks beyond the campfire glow. 3 years ago, when I was 22, I went on what was supposed to be a peaceful camping trip with my boyfriend Mason. We had been dating for about 8 months at that point, and both of us loved the outdoors. Mason was really into backpacking and had been trying to get me more involved in overnight trips rather than just day hikes. I had done plenty of car camping with my family growing up, but this was going to be my first real backpacking experience where we hiked miles into the wilderness with everything on our backs. I was nervous but excited. We spent weeks planning the trip, researching trails and buying gear. Mason already had most of what we needed, but I had to get a proper backpack and sleeping bag rated for the temperatures we would be facing. We decided on a state forest about 4 hours from where we lived. It was not one of the popular national parks that gets crowded, but rather a lesser-known area that still had maintained trails and designated backcountry camping zones. We got all the necessary permits, studied the maps, and packed our bags the night before. The morning we left, I remember feeling this mix of anticipation and slight anxiety. Something about going that deep into the woods with just the two of us felt both thrilling and slightly intimidating. Mason kept reassuring me that we would be fine, that he had done this dozens of times, and that the area we were going to was perfectly safe. We arrived at the trailhead around noon on a Friday in late September. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with clear skies forecasted for the entire weekend. The parking area was small, just a dirt lot that could fit maybe 10 vehicles. When we pulled in, there was only one other vehicle there, a dusty dark-colored SUV that looked like it had been there for a while based on the layer of pollen covering the windshield. Mason said that was a good sign, that we would have the trails mostly to ourselves. We shouldered our packs, locked the car, and started hiking. The trail was beautiful. It wound through dense forest with occasional clearings that offered views of distant mountains. We saw plenty of wildlife, mostly birds and squirrels, and passed a few day hikers coming back from shorter routes. Everyone we encountered was friendly, offering the standard hiker greetings and trail condition updates. After about 3 hours of steady hiking, we reached the area where we were permitted to camp. It was a stunning spot near the edge of a cliff that overlooked a valley. There were a few established fire rings indicating this was a commonly used camping area, but we were completely alone. We set up our tent in a flat spot about 30 feet from the cliff edge. Far enough back to be safe, but close enough to enjoy the view. Mason gathered firewood while I filtered water from a small stream nearby. By the time the sun started setting, we had a decent fire going and were cooking our freeze-dried meals. Everything felt perfect. The air was crisp, the stars were starting to emerge, and we were miles away from civilization. I remember thinking how glad I was that Mason had convinced me to try this type of camping. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. As darkness settled in completely, we sat by the fire talking and enjoying the solitude. The forest around us was alive with sounds, the usual symphony of insects, occasional bird calls, and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Mason pointed out constellations, and we made plans for the hike we would do the next day before heading back to the trailhead. Around 10:30, we decided to let the fire die down and get ready for bed. We were both tired from the hike and wanted to get an early start in the morning. That is when things started to feel wrong. As we were banking the fire, I got this sudden, intense feeling of being watched. I looked around at the dark tree lines surrounding our campsite but could not see anything beyond the reach of our headlamps. I mentioned it to Mason and he laughed it off, saying it was probably just the natural nervousness of being in the wilderness at night. He said everyone feels that way their first time camping in the backcountry. I tried to shake the feeling, but it persisted as we brushed our teeth and changed into our sleeping clothes inside the tent. We had just climbed into our sleeping bags when we heard it. Footsteps. Not animal footsteps, but definitely human footsteps coming up the trail toward our campsite. Mason and I both froze and listened. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, and they were getting closer. What immediately struck me as strange was that we could not see a headlamp or flashlight. Anyone hiking at night would need a light source, but there was nothing except the faint glow of our dying campfire barely illuminating the area. Mason unzipped the tent and stuck his head out. I heard him say hello, his voice uncertain. The footsteps stopped. Then a man's voice came from the darkness just beyond our campsite, asking if we were the only ones camping in this area. Mason answered yes, and asked if the person needed help or was lost. There was a pause, and then the man stepped into the dim light of our fire. I could see him through the open tent flap. He was tall, probably in his 40s, wearing dark pants and a jacket. What immediately caught my attention was that he had no backpack, no visible camping gear, and still no flashlight or headlamp, despite having just hiked up a trail in complete darkness. He had this strange smile on his face, not friendly but almost amused. Mason climbed out of the tent and stood up, and I followed, suddenly feeling very vulnerable sitting on the ground. The man introduced himself but did not offer a name. He said he was a park ranger and that this area of the forest was being closed due to bear activity. He said we needed to pack up immediately and hike out with him. Everything about the situation felt wrong. First, we had checked with the ranger station that morning, and there had been no mentions of closures or bear warnings. Second, this man was not wearing a uniform or displaying any kind of badge or identification. Third, his entire demeanor was off. He kept smiling in this way that made my skin crawl, and he was standing too close, invading our personal space in a way that felt intentionally intimidating. Mason, to his credit, remained calm but firm. He asked to see the man's credentials. The man's smile faded slightly, and he said he did not have them with him because he had been doing a patrol and left his gear at his vehicle. He insisted again that we needed to leave immediately, that it was not safe, and that he would escort us back to the trailhead. He said it in a way that sounded more like an order than a suggestion. I was terrified, but trying not to show it. Mason asked which ranger station he worked out of and which trail he had come up on. The man's answers were vague and contradictory. He said he had come from the North Trail, but we knew from our maps that there was no maintained trail from that direction. Mason pointed this out, and the man's expression changed. The smile vanished completely and was replaced with something cold and calculating. He took a step closer to Mason and said, We needed to come with him right now. His voice harder and more aggressive. He repeated it several times, becoming more insistent with each repetition. Mason stood his ground and said we were not going anywhere until we could verify who he was, and that if there was a real emergency, we would hike out on our own at first light. The man stared at Mason for what felt like an eternity. I was shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had my hand in my jacket pocket gripping my knife, though I had no idea what I would actually do if things turned violent. Finally, the man took a step back. He said something like we were making a mistake, that we had no idea what we were doing, and that he would not be responsible for what happened to us. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, his footsteps receding down the trail. Mason and I stood there in shocked silence for several minutes, neither of us moving. When we could no longer hear the footsteps, Mason immediately went to our packs and pulled out the satellite communicator we had brought for emergencies. We did not have cell service, but the device would let us send text messages to emergency services. Before Mason could send anything, we heard the footsteps again. But this time, they were not on the trail. They were circling around our campsite through the forest. We could hear branches snapping and leaves crunching as something or someone moved through the underbrush around us. The footsteps would stop. There would be silence, and then they would start again from a different direction. It sounded like the person was deliberately trying to keep us on edge, to let us know they were still there watching us. Mason made a decision. He said we were not going to be able to sleep, and trying to pack up and hike out in the dark would be even more dangerous. We would stay put, keep a fire going all night, and leave at first light. We both stayed outside the tent, feeding wood into the fire to keep it blazing. We sat back to back so we could watch all directions. I had never been so scared in my entire life. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow at the edge of the firelight could have been the man coming back. The circling footsteps continued for what must have been 2 hours. Sometimes they were close enough that we could hear breathing in the darkness. Other times they seemed to retreat farther away, only to come back closer again. Mason tried using his headlamp to spot whoever was out there, but the beam would just illuminate empty forest. Whoever or whatever was out there knew how to stay just out of sight. Around 2 a.m, the footsteps finally stopped. The forest went eerily quiet. No insects, no animals, just complete silence. We sat there waiting, too afraid to let our guard down. Neither of us spoke much. We just kept the fire going and counted down the minutes until sunrise. When the first light of dawn finally started filtering through the trees, we did not waste any time. We threw everything into our packs without bothering to organize anything properly. We just wanted to get out of there. We kicked dirt over the fire and started hiking back toward the trailhead as fast as we could manage with full packs. The entire hike back, about 3 hours, I kept looking over my shoulder expecting to see someone following us. Mason did the same. We barely spoke during the hike, both of us just focused on getting back to the car and getting out of there. When we reached the parking area, my heart sank. The dark SUV that had been there when we arrived was still parked in the same spot. We practically ran to our car, threw our packs in the back, and locked the doors. Mason drove us straight to the ranger station we had stopped at on our way in. We told them everything that had happened. The rangers took our report seriously and said they would investigate, but they confirmed what Mason had suspected. There had been no closures issued, no bear warnings, and no rangers had been sent out to that area. They said the description we gave did not match any of their staff. They told us to file a police report, which we did. The police said they would look into it, but were honest that without more information there was not much they could do. They suggested that the man might have been another camper trying to scare us away from the area for some reason, or potentially someone with more sinister intentions who got spooked when Mason pushed back against his authority claim. We never found out who that man was or what he wanted. The SUV in the parking lot was never accounted for. No other hikers reported similar encounters that weekend. Mason and I are still together and we still camp, but we have never gone back to that state forest. I think about that night often, about what might have happened if Mason had not questioned the man's credentials, if we had followed him into the dark forest. I think about the way he smiled, about how he knew exactly where we were camping despite claiming to be on a routine patrol, about those footsteps circling us all night. To anyone who camps in remote areas, please trust your instincts when something feels wrong. If someone claims to be a park ranger or any other authority figure, ask for identification. Real rangers will not be offended by the request. And if someone tries to get you to leave a safe area and follow them into the wilderness at night, do not go. Stay where you are, keep a fire going if you can, and wait for daylight. We were lucky that nothing worse happened to us that night, but I know in my gut that the man we encountered had no good intentions. The wilderness is full of dangers, but sometimes the most dangerous thing out there is another human being. The smell of pine needles and damp earth has always brought me a sense of peace. There is something about being alone in the forest, away from the constant noise and demands of everyday life, that allows me to think clearly and reset my mind. I have been camping solo since my early 20s, and by last October, when this incident happened, I had logged probably close to 50 nights alone in various forests and wilderness areas. I am careful. I follow all the safety protocols. I tell people where I am going and when I will be back. And I trust my instincts. Or at least I thought I did. Until that trip showed me there are some things in the woods that instinct cannot prepare you for. I had been planning this particular camping trip for weeks. It was early October, right when the leaves were at peak color in the national forest I had chosen. I had been to this forest twice before, both times with friends, and I knew of a perfect dispersed camping spot about 2 miles off the main trail. It was a small meadow surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with a stream running along the eastern edge. The first time I had camped there, I remember thinking it would be an ideal place for a solo trip. It was secluded enough to feel truly isolated, but not so remote that I would be in serious danger if something went wrong. I took Friday off work and drove the 4 hours to the forest. I arrived around noon with plenty of daylight left to hike in and set up camp. The trailhead parking area had only 2 other vehicles, which was exactly what I had hoped for. I shouldered my pack, locked my car, and started the hike. The weather was perfect for October, cool but not cold, with a slight breeze that carried the scent of decaying leaves. The trail was well maintained and easy to follow, and I made good time. When I reached the spot where I would need to leave the main trail and bushwhack to my camping meadow, I paused to check my GPS and make sure I had my bearings. The path to the meadow was not marked, but I had saved the coordinates and knew generally which direction to head. I pushed through the underbrush, following game trails where I could find them, and after about 20 minutes of careful navigation, I emerged into the meadow. It was just as beautiful as I remembered, maybe even more so, with the autumn colors surrounding it. I spent the next hour setting up my camp. I chose a spot near the tree line on the western side of the meadow, giving me a view of the open space and the stream beyond. I set up my tent, organized my gear, and gathered firewood for the evening. By the time I had everything arranged the way I wanted, it was late afternoon. I made myself an early dinner, ate while sitting on a fallen log near my tent, and read a book I had brought. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the stream. I felt completely content and at peace. As evening transitioned into night, I built a small fire and sat beside it watching the flames. The forest around me was alive with the usual sounds. I could hear insects chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance, and the gentle babbling of the stream. I was used to these sounds and found them comforting. I sat by the fire until around 9, then decided to turn in for the night. I wanted to wake up early to catch the sunrise and do some exploring the next day. I banked the fire, brushed my teeth, and climbed into my tent. I changed into my sleeping clothes, arranged my sleeping bag, and settled in with my book and headlamp. That is when I first noticed the temperature drop. It was not gradual like the normal cooling that happens after sunset. It was sudden and dramatic, like someone had opened a freezer door. I could see my breath inside the tent, something that had not been happening just minutes before. I thought maybe a cold front was moving in, so I put on an extra layer and burrowed deeper into my sleeping bag. Then the sound stopped, not gradually fading as animals settled for the night, but all at once like someone had flipped a switch. The insects went silent. The owl stopped calling. Even the stream seemed quieter, though I knew that was probably just my perception. The silence was so complete it felt oppressive, like the air itself had become heavy and thick. I lowered my book and turned off my headlamp, listening. Nothing. Absolute nothing. I would be lying if I said I was not scared, but I was trying to rationalize it. Sometimes animals go quiet when a predator is nearby. Maybe there was a bear or a mountain lion passing through the area, and once it moved on, the normal sounds would resume. I lay there in the darkness waiting, my ears straining for any noise. Minutes passed. The silence continued. Then I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. You know that feeling, the one that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up and sends a chill down your spine. It is primal, something left over from when our ancestors needed to sense danger to survive. I had felt it before in the woods, usually when I would spot a deer or other animal observing me from a distance. But this felt different. This felt malevolent. I sat up in my sleeping bag and reached for my headlamp, but something stopped me from turning it on. Some instinct told me that I did not want to see what was out there. Instead, I sat frozen, listening, waiting. That is when I saw the shadow. Through the fabric of my tent, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, I saw the silhouette of something moving between the trees. It was too tall to be a bear on all fours, too broad to be a deer. It looked human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The proportions were not quite right. The shadow paused between two trees about 30 feet from my tent. I could see it clearly outlined against the lighter background of the meadow beyond. It was not moving, just standing there, watching. I held my breath, not daring to move or make a sound. My hand found my knife in the dark and I gripped it tightly. We stayed like that, me frozen in my tent and the shadow standing motionless outside for what must have been 5 minutes but felt like an eternity. Then it moved, not away but closer. It glided between the trees with a movement that seemed too smooth, too fluid. There was no sound of footsteps, no crunch of leaves or snap of twigs. Just silent movement getting closer to my tent. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I was paralyzed with fear. The shadow reached the edge of my campsite and stopped again, now only about 15 feet from my tent. I do not know what made me do it, but I turned on my headlamp and shone it toward where the shadow had been. The beam cut through the tent fabric and illuminated the trees beyond. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, nothing. But I knew what I had seen. I knew something had been standing there moments before. I left my headlamp on and sat with my back against my backpack, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the tent walls. The silence continued. No sounds from the forest, no return of the insects or night birds. Just that heavy, oppressive quiet. I told myself I would stay awake, that I would wait until morning and then hike out immediately. But exhaustion and adrenaline are a strange combination, and at some point I must have dozed off. I woke to a sensation that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Something was touching my tent, not pressing against it like wind or a falling branch, but deliberately running along the fabric. I could feel it through the thin nylon, a pressure that moved slowly from the foot of my tent along the side toward where my head was. I was instantly fully awake, my heart hammering in my chest. I did not move. I barely breathed. The pressure continued its slow path around the tent, circling me. Whatever was out there was tracing the perimeter of my tent with what felt like fingers. The touch moved along the back wall, then along the other side, making a complete circuit before starting again. Around and around it went, never stopping, never speeding up or slowing down, just that constant, deliberate pressure against the tent fabric. I checked my watch. It was 2:17 in the morning. I had no idea how long this had been going on before I woke up. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, barely above a whisper, but unmistakably calling my name. Not a nickname or how I introduce myself to strangers, but my full legal first name that I never use. The name that only appears on official documents and that most people in my life do not even know. The voice was strange, gender neutral, with an odd quality that made it sound like it was coming from multiple directions at once. It called my name 3 times, each repetition exactly the same in tone and volume. Then silence. The pressure against the tent stopped. I sat there shaking, tears streaming down my face, gripping my knife so hard my knuckles were white. I did not understand what was happening. There was no logical explanation for someone being out here who would know my full name. No one even knew exactly where I was camping. I had told my friend I was going to this forest, but not the specific location of my campsite. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 3 o'clock came and went. 4 o'clock. I sat rigid, waiting for the sun to rise. Around 4:30, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the leaves and underbrush. It started from the direction of the stream and moved across the meadow toward the tree line on the opposite side from my tent. The sound was irregular, punctuated by pauses and what might have been labored breathing. It passed within 50 feet of my tent and continued until I could no longer hear it. At first light, I did not wait for the sun to fully rise. The moment there was enough gray light to see by, I threw on my boots, grabbed my pack, and crawled out of my tent. I did not bother taking it down or organizing anything. I just grabbed the essentials, my pack, my water, my phone, and GPS, and started moving. I used my GPS to navigate back to the main trail, not caring about the noise I made crashing through the underbrush. I just wanted to get away from that meadow as fast as possible. When I reached the main trail, I started running. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber. Then I walked until I caught my breath and ran again. I covered the 2 miles back to the trailhead in record time. When I reached my car, I sat inside with the doors locked, shaking and crying. I sat there for probably 30 minutes before I felt calm enough to drive. I did not go back for my tent. I did not care. As far as I am concerned, whatever is in that meadow can keep it. But something made me go to the ranger station before I left the area. I needed to report what had happened, even though I knew how insane it would sound. The ranger I spoke with listened to my story with a carefully neutral expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before asking me to describe the exact location. When I showed him on the map where I had been camping, his expression changed. He asked me to wait and went to speak with another ranger. They both came back, and the second ranger, an older man who looked like he had spent his entire career in these woods, asked me several questions. Had I taken any photos of the area? Had I noticed anything unusual about the trees or ground? Did I see any symbols or markings? I told him no to all of it, that I had just wanted to get out of there. He nodded slowly and then told me something that made my skin crawl. That meadow had a history. Multiple people over the years had reported strange experiences there. Feelings of being watched, unexplained, sounds, and shadows that moved wrong. 2 hikers in the early 2000s had reported hearing their names called by something in the woods. The Forest Service did not publicize it because they did not want to create panic or attract the kind of people who go looking for paranormal experiences. But it was known among the rangers that certain areas of the forest had something off about them. He advised me not to go back alone to retrieve my gear, and I assured him I had no intention of ever returning. I drove home that day and spent the next week trying to process what had happened. I eventually convinced myself that I would go back to solo camping, that I would not let one bad experience ruin something I loved. But I have not been able to do it. Every time I think about sleeping alone in a tent, I remember the feeling of something circling me, touching my tent, calling my name. I remember that heavy silence and the shadow that moved wrong. I still camp, but only with other people now and never in that forest. Some places are not meant for us. Some places have their own inhabitants, their own rules, and we are not welcome there. I learned that lesson the hard way in that meadow last October. Not all sounds in the forest have natural explanations, and not everything that calls your name in the darkness should be answered. This happened in the summer of 2023, and I still have nightmares about it. My name does not matter, but what happened to my friend Grace does. We were a group of 4, me, Grace, Lucas, and Elijah. We had all gone to college together and stayed close after graduation. Every summer for the past 6 years, we had done an annual camping trip. Just the 4 of us, somewhere different each time. It was our tradition, our way of staying connected despite our busy lives and careers pulling us in different directions. That summer, we chose a trail system in the mountains of Colorado, a place none of us had been before. The reviews online were great. People talked about stunning views, well-maintained trails, and plenty of established campsites. It was supposed to be an easy 3-day trip, nothing too challenging, just time to disconnect from our phones and reconnect with each other. We drove out together in Lucas's SUV, playing music and laughing the entire way. Grace was in particularly good spirits. She had just gotten a promotion at work and was talking about finally being able to afford the kind of life she had always wanted. We reached the trailhead Friday afternoon and started hiking to our campsite. The trail was beautiful, winding through alpine meadows and forests of aspen trees. We saw other hikers heading back to the parking area, families with kids, older couples, the kind of crowd that made you feel safe and comfortable. After about 3 hours of hiking, we reached the campsite we had reserved. It was perfect, a flat area with multiple tent pads, a bear box for food storage, and a small creek running nearby. We were the only ones there, which felt like a luxury. We spent the evening setting up camp and cooking dinner over our portable stove. Grace had brought ingredients for her famous camping chili, and we ate while watching the sun set behind the peaks. As darkness fell, we built a fire and sat around it telling stories. Lucas had brought a flask of whiskey and we passed it around, toasting to friendship and another successful camping trip. Around 10 o'clock, Grace stood up and said she needed to use the bathroom. There was a pit toilet about 100 yards down a side trail from our campsite. She grabbed her headlamp and started walking. She had been gone maybe 2 minutes when she came back quickly, her face pale. She said she had seen someone standing in the tree line between the campsite and the bathroom, just standing there watching us. She said whoever it was had not moved or responded when she called out asking if they needed help. The 3 of us grabbed our flashlights and went to investigate, but we did not see anyone. We searched the area thoroughly, calling out, but there was no response and no sign of anyone. Lucas suggested it might have been a deer or elk, that in the dark and with just a headlamp beam, it could have looked human-shaped. Grace insisted she knew what she had seen, but eventually, we convinced her it was probably just shadows and exhaustion playing tricks on her eyes. We went back to the fire and tried to lighten the mood, joking about Grace seeing the ghost of a mountain man or Bigfoot. She laughed along with us, but I could tell she was still unsettled. We stayed up for another hour before deciding to call it a night. We retreated to our tents around 11:30. Grace and I each had our own small tents, while Lucas and Elijah were sharing a larger two-person tent. Our tents were set up in a rough triangle formation, maybe 15 feet apart from each other. We said our good nights and zipped ourselves in. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the hike and the altitude. I have no idea what time it was when I woke up, but it was still completely dark. Something had woken me, some sound or instinct. I lay there in my sleeping bag listening, trying to figure out what had disturbed my sleep. Then I heard it. A zipper. Not the sound of someone getting comfortable in their tent, but the long, continuous sound of a tent door being fully opened. I assumed someone was getting up to use the bathroom and started to drift back to sleep. The next thing I remember is Elijah shouting my name. I jolted awake and checked my watch. It was 6:45 in the morning. I scrambled out of my tent to find Elijah and Lucas standing outside Grace's tent looking confused and worried. Her tent door was wide open, unzipped completely. Her sleeping bag was still inside, rumpled but not in the stuff sack she would have packed it in if she had gotten up early to hike. Her backpack was sitting inside the tent with all her belongings still inside. We called her name, first around the campsite, then louder, our voices echoing through the mountains. Nothing. We checked the bathroom area, the creek, everywhere within reasonable walking distance of camp. Grace was nowhere to be found. Lucas said we needed to start a systematic search, while Elijah ran back to the trailhead to get help and call the rangers. I agreed to stay at the camp in case Grace came back, though I was already feeling a growing sense of dread. Lucas headed east into the woods, calling Grace's name every few seconds. I stood at the campsite, straining to hear any response, any indication of where she might be. That is when I saw it. About 200 yards from camp, in the direction of the tree line where Grace had said she saw someone the night before, there was something reflecting the morning sunlight. I walked toward it, my heart pounding. It was Grace's headlamp. It was sitting on the ground, still turned on, the battery nearly dead, pointing at a strange arrangement of rocks. Someone had placed about 20 stones in a perfect circle, each one roughly the same size and shape. I picked up the headlamp and looked around. I could see a faint trail through the underbrush heading deeper into the forest, branches bent and broken as if something or someone had pushed through recently. I started to follow it, calling Grace's name. About 50 yards in, I found her jacket. It was hanging from a tree branch about 7 feet off the ground, too high for her to have casually placed it there. The jacket was torn along one sleeve, and when I pulled it down, I found that everything that had been in the pockets was missing. Her chapstick, her multi-tool, a protein bar, everything gone. But here is what made my blood run cold. Spread out on the ground directly beneath the jacket, arranged in another perfect circle, were all the items that had been in her pockets. They were placed with deliberate precision, evenly spaced around the circumference of the circle. In the center of the circle was a single stone with what looked like a drop of blood on it. I should have turned back right then. I should have waited for the rangers, but I was terrified for Grace, and I kept following the trail of broken branches. It led me deeper into a section of forest that seemed darker, quieter than the area around our campsite. The temperature felt colder. After another 100 yards, the trail just stopped. There were no more bent branches, no more signs of passage. It was like whatever I had been following had simply vanished or gone vertical up into the trees. That is when I heard Grace's voice calling for help. It came from my left, from deeper in the forest. I turned and ran toward it, crashing through underbrush and calling her name. Then I heard her voice again, but this time it came from behind me. I spun around, confused. Then I heard it from my right, then from above me. Her voice was coming from every direction at once, all calling for help in the exact same tone, the exact same words, like a recording being played from multiple speakers. I realized with horrifying clarity that whatever was making that sound, it was not Grace. I ran. I did not care about the trail or being quiet. I just ran back toward where I thought the campsite was, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. I burst out of the tree line near our camp, gasping and terrified. Lucas had returned from his search. When he saw my face and the jacket in my hands, he knew something terrible had happened. The Rangers arrived within 2 hours. We showed them everything: the headlamp, the circles of stones and belongings, the trail that led nowhere, Grace's abandoned tent with all her gear. They immediately called in a full search and rescue operation. Over the next 5 days, more than 50 people combed that forest. They brought in dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, experienced trackers. They found nothing. No trace of Grace beyond what we had already discovered. No footprints, no more torn clothing, nothing. The investigation went on for weeks. Grace's family hired private investigators. There were news stories and social media campaigns. But Grace was gone. Vanished as completely as if she had never existed. The case remains open, but there are no leads, no suspects, no logical explanation for what happened. A person cannot just disappear like that, not in this day and age, not with all our technology and resources. But Grace did. I think about her every single day. I think about that voice in the forest calling for help from every direction. I think about those perfect circles of stones and belongings, arranged with an intelligence and purpose I cannot begin to understand. Most of all, I think about how Grace told us she saw someone watching from the tree line, and how we laughed it off, convinced her she was seeing things. Maybe if we had listened, if we had packed up and left that night, she would still be here. The three of us who remain do not camp together anymore. We barely speak, if I am being honest. There is too much guilt, too many unanswered questions. Lucas moved to a different state. Elijah started seeing a therapist for anxiety and insomnia. I flinch at unexpected sounds and avoid forests entirely. We are all broken in our own ways by what happened that weekend. To anyone reading this, if someone tells you they saw something in the woods, believe them. Do not dismiss it. Do not rationalize it away. And if you ever find arrangements of stones or belongings in the forest that look too deliberate, too perfect to be natural, leave immediately. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some disappearances are not meant to be explained. Grace is gone, and I fear we will never know what took her or why. I have always preferred solitude when it comes to camping. There is something liberating about being completely alone in the wilderness, answering to no one, moving at your own pace, making your own decisions. I am 28 years old and have been camping solo for the past 6 years, mostly in remote areas of the western United States. I have a truck with a camper shell that I converted into a sleeping platform. Nothing fancy, just a foam mattress, some storage boxes and blackout curtains for the windows. It lets me camp pretty much anywhere I can drive, which in the vast public lands of Nevada and Utah is almost unlimited. Last March, I was driving through central Nevada on my way to visit some hot springs. I had been on the road for 2 days, mostly staying in established campgrounds, but I was getting tired of being around other people. I wanted true isolation, the kind where you cannot see another human being or hear another vehicle. So when I was about an hour outside of a small town, I turned off the highway onto a dirt road that headed out into the desert. I had good maps, plenty of water and food, and a full tank of gas. I drove for about 45 minutes, maybe 30 miles from the highway, until I found a spot that felt right. It was a flat area surrounded by low hills covered in sagebrush. There were no structures visible in any direction, no power lines, nothing man-made except the dirt road I had driven in on. The sun was starting to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful and peaceful. I pulled off the road about 50 yards, not wanting to block it, even though I had not seen another vehicle in the entire time I had been on this particular road. I parked the truck facing back toward the direction I had come from, a habit I had developed so I could make a quick exit if I ever needed to. I set up my camp chair outside, made myself a simple dinner on my camp stove, and watched the stars come out. The Milky Way was incredible, something you can never see near cities. I sat there for a couple of hours, just enjoying the silence and the vastness of the desert around me. Around 10 o'clock, I started getting tired. I cleaned up my dinner dishes, put away my camp chair, and climbed into the back of my truck. I locked the camper door from the inside, a simple latch system I had installed myself. I changed into my sleeping clothes, set my phone on airplane mode to save battery since there was no service anyway, and settled into my sleeping bag with a book. I read for maybe 30 minutes before my eyes started getting heavy. I turned off my headlamp and lay down. The truck was comfortable enough, and I had slept in it dozens of times before. I felt safe and secure. I fell asleep quickly. I have no idea what time it was when I woke up, but it was still completely dark. What woke me was the sensation of the entire truck shaking violently. My first thought was an earthquake, but the motion was wrong. It felt like something was physically pushing the truck, rocking it back and forth. Then I heard the sound of someone trying the door handle of the camper. Metal scraping against metal as the handle was turned repeatedly. My heart started pounding. I lay completely still, barely breathing, hoping whoever was out there would think the truck was empty and leave. The handle rattling stopped. I heard footsteps, heavy boots crunching on the desert gravel, walking around the perimeter of the truck. I could see shadows moving past the gaps in my blackout curtains as a flashlight beam swept along the sides of the vehicle. Then the footsteps stopped at the driver's side door. I heard the handle being tried there as well. I always locked the cab doors, but hearing someone attempt to open them while I was trapped in the back made my blood run cold. The person walked around the truck again, slower this time, and I heard a sound that made me absolutely terrified. It was the metallic sound of something hard being dragged along the side of the truck. A crowbar, maybe, or a large knife. The sound was deliberate and threatening, meant to let me know they knew I was inside. Then a man's voice spoke, low and rough. He said he knew I was in there. He said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. I did not respond. I barely breathed. I was trying to think clearly through my panic. My phone was useless with no signal. I had a knife within reach, but that would not do much good if this person was armed. My keys were in my pocket. If I could get to the driver's seat, I could start the truck and drive out of there. But to do that, I would have to unlock the camper door, climb through to the cab, and hope I could do it faster than the person outside could react. The person outside started working on the camper door latch. I could hear scraping and prying sounds. The latch was not particularly strong. It was meant to keep the door closed while driving, not to keep out a determined intruder. I knew it would not hold long. I had maybe 30 seconds to make a decision. I could hide and hope, or I could act. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do something, not to just lie there and wait to become a victim. I made my choice. I grabbed my knife, flicked it open, and in one motion I kicked the camper door as hard as I could. The latch gave way and the door flew open, hitting something or someone on the other side. I heard a grunt of surprise and pain. I did not look back or try to see who it was. I threw myself through the gap between the camper and the cab, landing half in the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys, but I managed to get them in the ignition and turn the engine over. That is when I felt a hand grab my ankle. The person had recovered and was reaching through from the back, trying to pull me out of the cab. I kicked hard, connecting with something solid, and heard another grunt. My foot came free. I threw the truck into drive and stomped on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, the camper door still hanging open, and I heard something hit the ground behind me as we accelerated. I did not care about the dirt road or staying on the path. I just drove straight out into the desert, bouncing over rocks and sagebrush, my headlights cutting wild arcs through the darkness. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a flashlight beam behind me. Then I saw headlights. There was another vehicle back there, starting up and beginning to follow me. That realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. This was not just one person on foot. They had a vehicle, which meant they could chase me. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, my truck protesting as I pushed it over terrain it was not designed to handle. The camper door was banging wildly, and I could hear things sliding around and falling out of the back. But I did not care. I just needed to get away. I drove like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. I was heading in the general direction of where I thought the main dirt road was, but I was not being careful about navigation. I just wanted distance. When I finally hit the road, I turned toward the highway and kept my speed as high as I dared on the washboard surface. I kept checking my mirrors, terrified I would see headlights behind me, but there was nothing. Either they had given up the chase or I had lost them in the desert. I did not slow down until I reached the highway. Even then, I did not stop. I drove straight to the nearest town, a small place with a gas station and a sheriff's substation. I pulled into the gas station parking lot under the bright lights and sat there, shaking for several minutes before I could get my legs to work well enough to get out of the truck. The camper door was hanging by one hinge. My belongings were scattered or missing. I did not care. I was alive. I went inside and asked the clerk to call the sheriff. A deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. I told him everything that had happened. He took my report and said they would send someone out to investigate the area where I had been camped. But he was honest about the chances of finding anyone. The desert is vast, and there are 1,000 places to disappear. He asked if I got a look at the person or their vehicle. I had to admit I had not. Everything had happened too fast, and I had been too focused on escaping. The deputy followed me to a motel in town and waited while I checked in. He gave me his card and told me to call if I remembered any other details. I thanked him and went to my room. I double-locked the door, pushed a chair against it, and sat on the bed fully clothed until the sun came up. I did not sleep. The next day I drove to a hardware store and bought better locks for my truck. I drove home, which took another full day, checking my mirrors constantly for any vehicle that seemed to be following me. When I finally reached my apartment, I sold the truck and camper within a week. I could not bring myself to sleep in it again. Every time I looked at it, I thought about that hand grabbing my ankle, about how close I had come to whatever that person intended to do to me. I still camp, but I've never gone solo again. I always go with friends now, and we always stay in established campgrounds with other people around. I learned the hard way that remote does not mean safe. In fact, isolation is exactly what predators look for. They target people who are alone in places where no one can hear them scream. I was lucky that I reacted when I did, that my truck started, that I managed to get away. Not everyone is that lucky. If you camp alone in remote areas, please understand the risk you are taking. Have a plan for how you will escape if something goes wrong. Keep your keys accessible, lock your doors, and if something feels wrong, trust that feeling and leave immediately. Do not wait to confirm the danger. By the time you know for certain, it may be too late to escape. I need to tell you about something that happened when I was 19, working as a summer camp counselor. It was my second year doing the job, and I thought I had seen and dealt with everything a camp counselor could encounter. Homesick kids, minor injuries, rainstorms that flooded tents, even a bear wandering through camp once. But what happened that night on our overnight backpacking trip was something else entirely. Something that made me quit by the end of the summer and avoid overnight camping for years afterward. The camp I worked at was in the mountains of North Carolina, surrounded by thousands of acres of national forest. Part of the program for the older campers was a 2-day backpacking trip where they would hike 5 miles into the backcountry, camp overnight, and hike back the next day. It was meant to teach wilderness skills and self-reliance. I was assigned to lead a group of 12-year-olds on this trip along with another counselor named Henry. Henry was 21, had been working at the camp for 4 years, and was one of the most experienced outdoorsmen on staff. If something went wrong, he was exactly the person you would want with you. We had 8 kids in our group, 4 boys and 4 girls. They were all good kids, excited about the adventure and well prepared. We spent the morning of the trip going over what to pack, reviewing trail safety rules and making sure everyone had appropriate footwear and clothing. By early afternoon, we started hiking. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked, gradually ascending through hardwood forest. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a slight breeze keeping the bugs at bay. The kids did great on the hike. There was the usual chatter and singing, some complaints about sore feet and heavy packs, but nothing unusual. We reached our designated camping area around 5 in the evening. It was a nice spot, flat and clear, with established fire rings and a nearby stream for water. We had the area completely to ourselves, which was exactly what we had hoped for. Henry and I supervised as the kids set up their tents in pairs. Then we worked together to prepare dinner. We cooked hot dogs and beans over the fire, and the kids roasted marshmallows for dessert. As darkness settled in, we played a few campfire games and told stories. I made the mistake of letting the kids tell ghost stories, which got them pretty worked up. Looking back, that irony is not lost on me. We had them all settled in their tents by 10 o'clock with strict instructions to stay inside and go to sleep. Henry and I sat by the fire for another hour, keeping watch and making sure everyone actually settled down. By 11, the camp was quiet except for the sounds of the forest around us. Henry suggested we take shifts sleeping, so one of us was always awake in case any of the kids needed something or there was a problem. I volunteered to take the first watch. Henry went to our tent, which we had set up slightly apart from the kids, but still close enough to hear if anyone called for us. I sat by the fire, occasionally adding wood to keep it going, and listened to the nighttime symphony of crickets, frogs from the stream, and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was around 11:30 when I first heard the singing. It was faint at first, so quiet I thought I might be imagining it. A woman's voice singing without words, just a melody. It was beautiful, haunting in the way that traditional folk songs can be. I assumed there was another camping group somewhere nearby that we had not noticed. Maybe someone singing themselves to sleep. I did not think much of it, though I was slightly annoyed that we were not as alone as I had thought. But then the singing got louder. Not dramatically, but noticeably, like whoever was singing was moving closer to our camp. The melody was the same, repeating over and over, but it was definitely getting nearer. I stood up and looked around, trying to see if I could spot another campfire or any lights that would indicate where the singing was coming from. I saw nothing but darkness beyond the reach of our fire. The singing continued to grow louder, and that is when I started to feel uneasy. The voice was moving around the perimeter of our campsite, circling us. One moment it seemed to come from the trail we had hiked in on, the next from the direction of the stream, then from the opposite side entirely. It was as if the person singing was walking in a wide circle around our tents. But there was no sound of footsteps, no rustling of leaves or snapping of twigs. Just the voice moving impossibly through the forest. I heard a tent zipper and saw one of the kids, a girl named Sarah, poke her head out. She asked me in a whisper what the pretty music was. That confirmed I was not imagining it. I told her it was probably just another camper and that she should go back to sleep, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. She nodded and zipped her tent back up. But within minutes, 2 more tents opened and more kids asked about the singing. They all described it the same way: pretty music, a lady singing. I woke Henry. He crawled out of our tent looking confused and annoyed, but the expression on his face changed the moment he heard the singing. He looked at me and I saw my own unease reflected in his eyes. He asked if I had seen anyone and I shook my head. By this point, all 8 kids were awake and whispering to each other from their tents. The singing was loud now, clearly audible over the fire and the normal forest sounds. In fact, I realized the normal forest sounds had stopped. The crickets had gone silent. The frogs had stopped calling. There was just the singing, moving around us in that impossible circle. Then it stopped, abruptly mid-melody, as if someone had cut a recording. The silence that followed was complete and oppressive. Henry grabbed his flashlight and told the kids to stay in their tents. He was going to investigate. I stayed by the fire with my own flashlight, making sure I could see all the tents and keep the kids calm. Henry walked toward the tree line, his light sweeping back and forth across the darkness. He had been gone maybe 30 seconds when we heard the scream. It was not human. I do not know how else to describe it except to say it sounded like someone had taken a human scream and distorted it, made it deeper and more guttural. It came from the forest, from the same area where the singing had been. The kids started crying. Several of them unzipped their tents and ran to where I was standing by the fire. I gathered them close, trying to project a calm I absolutely did not feel. Henry came running back, his face pale even in the orange glow of the firelight. He told me we needed to get the kids together and keep them calm. Something was moving through the brush out there, something large. We could hear branches breaking and what sounded like heavy breathing or panting. Whatever it was circling the camp just like the singing had, staying just beyond the reach of our lights. Then the singing started again, but this time it was wrong. The beautiful melody was gone, replaced by something discordant and disturbing. And there was not one voice anymore. There were multiple voices, all singing the same notes but slightly out of sync with each other, creating this horrible overlapping effect. Some of the voices sounded high and feminine, others impossibly deep. The kids were terrified, several of them sobbing, all of them pressed against Henry and me. Henry made a decision. He said we were not staying here. We were going to pack up the essentials and hike out in the dark. It was risky, hiking an unfamiliar trail at night with frightened children, but staying felt more dangerous. We worked quickly, stuffing sleeping bags into backpacks, making sure every kid had a working flashlight or headlamp. The singing continued the entire time, that awful chorus of overlapping voices circling us. The crashing sounds in the brush got closer, then farther, then closer again. We formed a tight group with Henry in front and me bringing up the rear. The kids were sandwiched between us, holding hands in a chain. We started down the trail, moving as quickly as we dared, with everyone using their lights. The singing followed us. It stayed with us for the first mile, always just behind or to the side, never ahead. The kids were crying but moving, following Henry's instructions to keep walking and not look into the forest. After about a mile, the singing began to fade. By the time we had covered 2 miles, it was gone completely. The normal forest sounds gradually returned. Crickets, the distant call of an owl, wind moving through the trees. It felt like emerging from a nightmare into reality. We kept walking, not wanting to stop until we were completely out of those woods. We reached the trailhead at 3 in the morning. The kids were exhausted and traumatized, but we were out. We drove back to the main camp and I called my supervisor. She came to meet us and we spent the next hour explaining what had happened while the camp nurse checked over the kids. They were physically fine but emotionally shaken. We called parents the next morning and explained there had been an incident and the kids were being sent home early. Several parents showed up that day to collect their children. I do not blame them. Henry and I were asked to file detailed reports about what happened. We told the truth, knowing how insane it sounded. My supervisor listened with a carefully neutral expression. When we finished, she told us something I will never forget. This was not the first time counselors had reported strange experiences on overnight trips in that particular section of forest. Unexplained sounds, feelings of being followed, singing that could not be explained. The camp had stopped using that camping area for several years after an incident in the early 2000s, but budget constraints had forced them to start using it again. She said we had done the right thing getting the kids out of there, and that she would make sure that camping area was permanently removed from the program. As for what we actually heard and experienced, she had no explanation. Neither do I, even now. I know what I heard. I know those kids heard it too. We all heard that impossible chorus of voices circling us in the darkness. Henry quit at the end of the summer and I did the same. Neither of us could shake the feeling that we had encountered something in those woods that we were never meant to find. My friend Chloe and I have been hiking together for about 5 years. We met at a hiking club meetup and bonded over our shared love of the outdoors and multi-day backpacking trips. We are both experienced hikers, both in our mid-20s and both very aware of the risks that come with being women on the trail. We have had our share of uncomfortable encounters over the years, guys who get too friendly, men who make inappropriate comments, but nothing we could not handle with firm boundaries and quick exits. What happened last spring was different. It was the kind of experience that made me realize just how vulnerable we actually are out there. We had planned a 4-day loop trail in the Appalachian region. It was early May, perfect weather for hiking, and we had been looking forward to this trip for months. We started on a Thursday morning, hitting the trailhead around 9. The first day was beautiful and uneventful. We covered about 10 miles, set up camp at a designated shelter, met a few other hikers, and slept well. Day 2 started just as perfectly. Clear skies, comfortable temperature, and our legs felt strong after the previous day's warm-up. Around midday on the second day, we stopped at a scenic overlook for lunch. We had trail mix and sandwiches we had packed, and we sat on a rock outcropping eating and enjoying the view of the valley below. That is when we first saw him. A man hiking alone, maybe a quarter-mile behind us on the trail. We could see him clearly from our elevated position. He was wearing a red jacket and had a gray backpack. He was moving at a steady pace, and when he noticed us looking, he waved. We waved back politely and continued eating our lunch. After about 20 minutes, we packed up and continued hiking. The trail led away from the overlook and back into the forest. About an hour later, we stopped to filter water from a stream. As I was working the pump on the water filter, Chloe nudged me and gestured back down the trail. The man in the red jacket was there, maybe 100 yards behind us, just standing on the trail. When he saw us looking, he started walking again at that same steady pace. We finished filtering our water and moved on. Over the next 3 hours, we became increasingly aware that the man was maintaining a consistent distance behind us. We would hike for a while and then stop to check the map or adjust our packs, and within minutes we would see him appear on the trail behind us. He never got closer than about 50 yards, but he never fell farther behind either. Chloe mentioned that it felt weird, and I agreed. It was possible we just happened to be hiking at the same pace, but something about it felt deliberate. We decided to test it. At the next clearing, we stopped and pretended to have an issue with one of Chloe's boots. We spent a good 10 minutes sitting there, tightening laces, examining the sole, making it obvious we were taking a break. The man appeared on the trail and stopped. He did not come closer or pass us, he just stopped and waited, standing there watching us. When we stood up and started hiking again, he started moving again. That was when we knew for certain that he was following us. Chloe suggested we pick up our pace and try to put some distance between us and him. We started hiking faster, pushing ourselves harder than was comfortable with full packs. We kept it up for about 30 minutes, glancing back frequently. The man matched our pace. He was always there, always the same distance behind us. We tried slowing down dramatically, and he slowed down too. It was like he was tethered to us, maintaining that exact spacing no matter what we did. We came to a fork in the trail where a side path led to a water source. Chloe suggested we take the detour even though we did not need water, just to see if he would follow. The side trail was only marked with a small sign and was not part of the main loop. We turned onto it and hiked quickly out of sight of the main trail. We waited behind some trees and watched. 5 minutes later, the man in the red jacket turned onto the side trail and continued following us. At this point, we were genuinely scared. This was not coincidence. This was deliberate stalking. We discussed our options. We were at least 6 miles from the nearest trailhead, too far to just turn around and hike out. We had another campsite reserved for that night, about 4 miles ahead. Chloe suggested we hike fast and try to reach the campsite while there was still daylight, hoping there would be other hikers there who could provide safety in numbers. We hiked as fast as we could manage, occasionally jogging on flat sections. We did not look back. We did not want to know if he was keeping up. We just wanted to reach the campsite. When we finally arrived, our hearts sank. The campsite was empty. There were several tent pads and a fire ring, but no other campers. It was only about 4 in the afternoon, still plenty of daylight left, so we hoped others would arrive before dark. We chose a tent site and started setting up. We were both on edge, constantly looking at the trail entrance to the campsite. About 15 minutes after we arrived, the man appeared. He walked into the campsite, looked directly at us, and then chose a tent site about 50 feet away. He dropped his pack and started setting up his own tent. He did not say anything, did not acknowledge us beyond that initial look, but the message was clear. He had followed us here and was going to camp right next to us. Chloe and I huddled together and whispered urgently about what to do. We could keep hiking and try to reach the next campsite, but that was another 7 miles and we would not make it before dark. We could hike back toward the trailhead, but that was 6 miles and meant hiking in the dark as well. We decided to stay, finish setting up our tent, and hope that other hikers would arrive before nightfall. We would take turns staying awake all night if we had to. We set up our tent in record time and stayed outside near the fire ring, not wanting to be inside the tent where we could not see what he was doing. The man finished setting up his tent and then sat on a log near his site. He just sat there staring at us, not looking away when we made eye contact, not pretending to do something else, just openly staring. It was one of the most unsettling things I have ever experienced. Around 5:30, another group of hikers arrived, a family, 2 parents, and 2 teenage boys. We have never been so relieved to see other people. They set up their tent on the opposite side of the campsite from the man, chatting happily about their day. Chloe and I stayed close to them, making conversation, trying to stay in their presence as much as possible without explaining why. As soon as the family arrived, the man's behavior changed. He stopped staring and went into his tent. But we could see the shadow of him sitting inside, and we knew he was watching. When the family started making dinner, we did the same, staying near them. The father was friendly and talkative, asking about our hike and sharing stories about their own trip. We kept our responses light but kept scanning the area where the man's tent was. After dinner, as it started getting dark, the man emerged from his tent and walked over to where we were all sitting near the family's fire. He stopped a few feet away and just stood there. The father asked if he wanted to join them at the fire, trying to be friendly. The man ignored him and looked directly at Chloe and me. He said he had been watching us all day and thought we were very attractive. He said he had followed us because he wanted to get to know us better. He said we should come to his tent and hang out with him. The father immediately stood up, putting himself between the man and us. He told the man that was inappropriate and that he needed to leave. The man smiled, this creepy, knowing smile, and said he was just being friendly. He said there was no reason to be rude. The father, who was a big guy, took a step toward him and said again that he needed to leave. The man stared at him for a long moment, then looked at us and said he would see us later. Then he turned and walked back to his tent. The father asked if we knew him, and we explained that he had been following us for hours on the trail and had made us very uncomfortable. The father and mother exchanged a look, and the mother said they were not comfortable with the situation either. The father said we should all stay together that night and hike out together in the morning. We gratefully agreed. We moved our tent closer to theirs and spent the night taking shifts with the father to keep watch. The man stayed in his tent, but we could see his flashlight moving around inside periodically. None of us slept much. At first light, we all packed up quickly. The Sia man was still in his tent. We left the campsite as a group and hiked together for the next several miles until we reached a trailhead where the family's car was parked. They offered to drive us back to where our car was, which was at a different trailhead, and we accepted. When we reported the incident to the trail authorities, they took our description and said they would look into it. A week later, we got a call saying the man had been identified. He had a history of harassing female hikers on various trails in the region. There were multiple reports against him, but he had never done anything violent, so there was not much they could legally do beyond banning him from certain trails. The ranger we spoke with admitted that enforcement was nearly impossible on remote backcountry trails. Chloe and I still hike together, but we have changed how we do it. We only hike on popular trails during peak season now. We carry whistles and pepper spray. We are much more cautious about our surroundings and other hikers, and we never hike as just two women anymore. We always go with at least one other person, preferably a man, which is a sad reality but a necessary one. To women who hike, please be aware that you are targeted. Solo female hikers and pairs of women are seen as vulnerable by certain predators. Stay with groups when possible. Trust your instincts. If someone is following you, do not dismiss it as paranoia. Make noise, stay visible, and get to safety. We were lucky that family showed up when they did. I do not want to think about what might have happened if we had been alone with that man all night. It was late September when my girlfriend Abigail and I decided to take a last-minute camping trip. We both had been working too much and needed to get away from the city for a weekend. I was browsing online for campgrounds within a few hours' drive when I came across a place I had never heard of before. It was a small campground in a state forest with surprisingly good reviews. People described it as quiet, scenic, and well-maintained, but not crowded. The photos showed nice campsites with picnic tables and fire rings surrounded by dense forest. It looked perfect. I made a reservation for one of the sites for Friday and Saturday night. We packed up Thursday evening after work and drove the 3 hours to the campground. We arrived around dusk, that strange transitional time when the light is fading but it is not quite dark yet. As we turned into the campground entrance, the first thing I noticed was how empty it was. The campground had maybe 30 sites spread across a loop road, and there were no other vehicles anywhere, not a single other camper. I mentioned to Abigail that it was weird for a weekend, even late in the season. She said maybe everyone was waiting until Friday to arrive. We drove slowly around the loop looking for our assigned site. The campground was actually very nice. Each site had a level tent pad, a picnic table, and a fire ring. The facilities looked clean and recently maintained, but the emptiness was unsettling. There was a camp host site near the entrance, a small RV pad with a sign indicating it was for the host, but there was no RV there. No vehicle, no indication anyone was managing the campground. Abigail said it felt heavy, her word for when a place gives off bad energy. I laughed it off and told her we had the whole place to ourselves, which was kinda cool. We found our site and started setting up camp. It was site number 17, nestled in a curve of the loop with woods behind it. We pitched our tent, got our sleeping bags and pads arranged inside, and started gathering wood for a fire. By the time we had everything set up, it was fully dark. We built a fire and made dinner, simple camping food, hot dogs and beans. We sat by the fire talking and trying to relax, but Abigail kept saying she felt weird about the place. She could not explain why, just that something felt off. Around 9:30, I got up to walk to the bathroom, which was a small building near the center of the campground loop. I took my flashlight and headed down the road. As I was walking back, I noticed something strange. In one of the campsites I was passing, maybe 5 sites away from ours, I saw children's toys scattered on the ground. A small plastic shovel, a bucket, a stuffed animal that looked weathered but not ancient. They were just lying there in the dirt as if a child had been playing and left them. What made it strange was how far back into the woods behind the campsite they were, at least 20 feet from the tent pad. I shone my light around but did not see anything else unusual, so I kept walking back to our site. When I got back, I told Abigail about the toys. She did not like that. She said it was weird that they would be abandoned like that, especially so far from the actual campsite. We debated going to look at them together, but decided against it. It was dark, we were tired, and it was probably just leftover from a family who had camped there recently and forgot some items. We were sitting by the fire around 10 when we both saw lights turn on in one of the distant campsites. Not flashlight or headlamp beams, but what looked like lantern light, a steady glow coming from a site maybe 10 spots down the loop from us. Abigail grabbed my arm and pointed. We watched for a few minutes. The light stayed on, not moving. I said maybe other campers had arrived and we just had not heard their vehicle. I suggested we walk over and say hello, be neighborly. Abigail absolutely refused. She said something was wrong and we should not go over there. We sat watching the light for maybe 10 more minutes. Then it went out. Complete darkness again. We waited to see if it would come back on or if we would see any other signs of activity. Nothing. Then maybe 5 minutes later, lights came on in a different campsite, this one closer to us, maybe 6 sites away. Same kind of steady glow, like a lantern. Abigail was visibly frightened now. She said lights do not just turn on by themselves, that someone had to be doing it. But we had not seen anyone, had not heard any vehicles or voices or footsteps. The campground was completely silent except for the crackling of our fire. The second light stayed on for about the same amount of time, then went out. We sat there in tense silence, waiting. Sure enough, a few minutes later, lights came on in another site. This pattern continued, lights turning on in different campsites, staying lit for a few minutes, then going dark. It was moving around the loop, not in any particular order, but always in different locations. At no point did we see or hear anyone. Then we heard the children laughing. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere in the woods behind our campsite. Young children, maybe 2 or 3 of them, giggling and playing. At 10:30 at night, in an empty campground, in the woods, Abigail grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. She was shaking. I was trying to stay calm, trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe there was a house nearby and the sound was carrying. Maybe it was some kind of animal that sounded like children. But I did not believe my own explanations. The laughing continued for a few minutes, seeming to move through the woods parallel to the campground loop. Then it stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt worse than the laughing. We sat by our fire, neither of us speaking, both of us on edge. I was debating whether we should pack up and leave when Abigail pointed at something behind me. I turned around and felt my blood run cold. Our fire had been burning well. We had just added wood 10 minutes earlier, but it was completely extinguished, not dying down like fires do naturally, but out, as if someone had thrown water on it or smothered it. And our tent, we had left it zipped closed, was now completely unzipped. The door was wide open. Neither of us had been near the tent since we sat down by the fire. I jumped up and grabbed my flashlight, shining it at the tent and all around the campsite. Nothing. No one there. But someone or something had put out our fire and opened our tent while we were sitting 10 feet away. Abigail was on her feet, saying we needed to leave right now. I agreed. We did not care that it was night or that we were tired. We just wanted to get out of there. That is when my truck would not start. I turned the key and got nothing. Not even the clicking sound of a dead battery trying to turn over. Just complete silence. I tried again. Nothing. My truck had been running perfectly. I had just driven 3 hours with no issues. There was no reason it should not start. I tried again and again, my panic rising with each failed attempt. Abigail was crying, saying we were trapped. We sat in the locked truck with the doors locked, both of us terrified. I tried the ignition every few minutes, hoping it would suddenly work. Through the windows, we could see lights continuing to turn on and off in different campsites around the loop. We heard voices at one point, adults arguing in a language neither of us recognized. The voices seemed to come from multiple directions at once, near and far simultaneously. We heard footsteps on the gravel road circling the truck, slow and deliberate. We saw shadows moving between campsites, human-shaped but wrong in some way we could not define. We stayed in that truck until sunrise, neither of us sleeping, both of us watching the windows for any sign of what was out there. The moment the first light of dawn began to appear, I tried the ignition again. The truck started immediately. No hesitation, no problems, like nothing had ever been wrong. I did not question it. I threw the truck into drive and we got the hell out of there. We left our tent, our camping gear, everything. We just drove. We stopped at a gas station about 20 miles away. While Abigail used the bathroom, I asked the clerk if he knew anything about the campground we had just left. The look he gave me when I named it told me everything. He said people do not camp there anymore, that the campground was maintained by the state, kept clean and open officially. But locals avoid it. When I asked why, he said the land had a bad history. Something about a religious compound that had been there in the 1970s, multiple deaths, accusations of abuse and ritual activities. He said the state bought the land cheap after it was abandoned and turned it into a campground, but strange. Things happened there. People reported seeing and hearing things that could not be explained. He asked if we had experienced anything unusual. I told him some of it, and he just nodded like he had heard similar stories before. He said we were smart to leave. He said some places hold on to their past, and that campground was one of them. Whatever had happened there decades ago had left something behind, something that did not want visitors. Abigail and I drove home in silence. We have never talked much about that night, even between ourselves. It is too disturbing to put into words, but I think about it often. About those lights turning on and off with no one there to turn them on. About the children laughing in the empty woods. About our extinguished fire and open tent. about my truck refusing to start until daylight. Some campgrounds should stay empty. Some places are maintained and kept open but should never be used. That campground is one of them. I am 30 years old and have been hiking since I was a teenager. I know the rules. Stay on marked trails, tell someone where you're going, carry the 10 essentials, check weather forecasts. I follow these rules religiously because I have heard too many stories about people getting lost or injured in the wilderness. But last fall I made a series of small mistakes that compounded into something I still cannot fully explain or rationalize. It started as a simple day hike. I was visiting a national park I had been to several times before, a place I was comfortable with. I planned to do a 4-hour loop trail I had done twice previously. It was a beautiful October day, clear skies, perfect temperature for hiking. I arrived at the trailhead around 2 in the afternoon, which was later than ideal, but I figured I had plenty of time to complete the loop before dark. That was mistake number 1. I started hiking at a good pace, feeling strong and enjoying the familiar trail. The first hour was exactly as I remembered it. The trail was well maintained, clearly marked with blazes on trees and moderately traveled. I passed a few other hikers heading back toward the trailhead, and we exchanged the usual greetings. Everything was normal. About 2 hours in, I reached a fork in the trail that I did not remember from my previous hikes. I stopped and checked my phone, but I had lost signal about 30 minutes earlier, so I could not pull up a GPS map. I had a paper map in my pack, but honestly, I thought I knew this trail well enough that I did not need it. That was mistake number 2. I looked at both paths. One seemed to curve left and uphill, the other continued straight on relatively flat ground. I remembered the loop trail staying fairly flat through this section, so I took the straight path. I hiked for another hour, checking my watch periodically. I should have been getting close to completing the loop and heading back toward the trailhead, but nothing looked familiar. The trees were denser here, the trail narrower. I had not seen another hiker in over an hour. I started to get concerned that I had taken a wrong turn at that fork. I stopped and pulled out my map, finally admitting I needed it. The problem was I could not figure out where I was on the map. The trail I was on was not clearly marked, and there were several possible routes I could have taken. I made a decision to backtrack to the fork and take the other path. I turned around and started hiking back the way I had come. This is where things started to get strange. The trail looked different. I know that trails can look different when you hike them in the opposite direction, but this was more than that. Landmarks I remembered passing, a distinctive fallen log, a boulder with moss on one side, were not where I expected them to be. Some were missing entirely. I told myself I was just turned around and anxious, that I was not remembering correctly. After hiking back for what I estimated was the right amount of time to reach the fork, I still had not found it. The trail just kept going, winding through forest that all started to look the same. My concern was turning into real fear. I checked my watch. It was after 5. The sun would set by 6:30. I needed to figure out where I was and get back to the trailhead fast. That is when I found the camp. It was just off the trail, maybe 20 feet into the trees. A small clearing with the remains of a fire pit. The ashes looked recent, still showing some structure rather than being completely scattered by wind and rain. There were no tents or gear, but someone had definitely been there recently. What made it strange was that this area did not allow dispersed camping. You could only camp in designated sites with permits. I walked into the clearing to get a closer look at the fire pit. The ashes were warm, not hot, but definitely warm to the touch. Someone had been here within the last few hours. I called out, asking if anyone was there, if anyone needed help. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet forest, and the silence that followed felt oppressive. No response, just the wind moving through the trees. I was about to leave when I noticed something carved into one of the trees at the edge of the clearing, an arrow pointing deeper into the forest. I walked over to examine it. It was fresh, the exposed wood still lighter colored than the bark around it. Then I noticed another arrow carved into a tree about 30 feet away in the direction the first arrow pointed, and another beyond that. Someone had marked a trail with carved arrows leading into the forest away from the main path. I should have ignored them. I should have stayed on the trail I was on and kept trying to find my way back. But I was lost. My phone was useless, and I was running out of daylight. I thought maybe the arrows led to a ranger station or a road or some way out of the forest, so I followed them. Mistake number 3. The arrows led me deeper into increasingly dense forest. There was no clear path, just the carved arrows appearing on trees every 50 feet or so, guiding me forward. I pushed through underbrush, climbed over fallen logs, and descended into a small ravine. The whole time, a voice in my head was screaming that this was wrong, that I should turn back. But I kept thinking the next arrow might lead me somewhere helpful. After following maybe a dozen arrows, I came to a clearing. In the center was a structure made from branches and what looked like bones. Animal bones, I hoped, though I could not tell from the size. They were arranged in a deliberate pattern, branches woven together to form something like a dome or shrine. Around the structure were more symbols carved into trees, not arrows this time, but strange geometric shapes and patterns I did not recognize. Every instinct I had was telling me to run. This was not a ranger station or a road. This was something else. Something wrong. I backed away from the clearing and was about to turn and run when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw nothing but forest. But I had definitely heard footsteps, multiple sets moving through the underbrush. Then I heard voices, low and indistinct, speaking in what might have been words but could not make out. The voices seemed to come from multiple directions surrounding the clearing. I ran. I did not care about the arrows or finding a trail. I just picked a direction away from the voices and ran as fast as I could through the forest. Branches tore at my clothes and face. I tripped over roots and rocks but kept my feet under me. Behind me, I could hear crashing sounds like multiple people or animals giving chase. I ran harder, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I ran downhill, which felt faster, and suddenly I was tumbling. I had hit an embankment I had not seen and went sliding down a steep slope. I hit the bottom hard, pain exploding in my left ankle. I tried to stand and immediately fell. My ankle was either badly sprained or broken. I could not put weight on it. I dragged myself behind a large boulder and huddled there, trying to quiet my breathing and listen. Above me, on the slope I had just fallen down, I could see lights moving. Flashlights or lanterns sweeping back and forth. Multiple lights, at least 3 or 4. The voices continued, that same low, indistinct sound. They were searching the area, looking for something, looking for me. I do not know how long I stayed hidden behind that boulder. It felt like hours. The lights would move away, then come back closer. I heard footsteps right above me at one point, so close I could have reached up and touched the person's boots if they had looked down. But they passed by. Eventually, the lights moved farther away and the voices faded. I waited until I could no longer see or hear anything. The sun had set and it was fully dark. I knew I could not stay where I was all night with an injured ankle, no shelter, and no way to call for help. I had to move. Using my phone's flashlight to see, I started crawling. I could not stand, so I crawled, dragging my injured leg behind me. I pulled myself uphill using tree roots and rocks to climb. After what must have been 30 minutes of excruciating crawling, I reached more level ground. And that is when I saw the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. A trail marker. An official Park Service trail marker nailed to a tree. I had found an actual trail. I pulled myself onto the path and started crawling along it, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere that people might be. I had crawled maybe 100 yards when I saw a light ahead. A real light, not the searching lights from before, but a steady headlamp beam. A voice called out asking if someone was there. I shouted back that I needed help, that I was injured. 2 hikers appeared, a couple who had been doing a sunset hike and were heading back. They saw me on the ground and immediately came to help. They gave me water, assessed my ankle, and called park rangers on a satellite communicator they carried. They said the trail we were on led back to a trailhead about a mile away. Not the trailhead I had started from, but a different one on the opposite side of the park. The rangers arrived within 40 minutes on ATVs. They stabilized my ankle, got me onto a vehicle, and drove me out. They asked what happened, and I told them everything. The wrong turn, the arrows, the structure made of bones, the voices and lights chasing me. The rangers exchanged looks but did not say much. They got me to an ambulance that took me to the hospital. My ankle was broken, and I had numerous cuts and bruises. The next day, a ranger came to take my statement. He asked me to show him on a map where I had been. I tried, but honestly, I had no idea. Somewhere in the interior of the park, far from marked trails. He said they would investigate, but that the park covered thousands of acres of wilderness. Without specific coordinates, finding the location I described would be nearly impossible. He did tell me one thing that made my blood run cold. Other hikers had reported finding carved arrows and strange structures in remote parts of the park. The theory was that someone, maybe multiple people, were living deep in the wilderness, far from any trails or designated camping areas. Whoever they were, they did not want to be found, and they were territorial about their space. The ranger said I was lucky to have gotten away. I still hike, but I am much more careful now. I never trust unmarked trails or follow anything that leads me away from official paths. And if I ever see carved arrows pointing into the wilderness, I go the opposite direction as fast as I can. Not all trails lead somewhere safe, and not all markers are meant to help you. Some are meant to lead you exactly where you should not go.